I'm Chris Lee of Southeastern 14, joined by Blake Lovell, Blayne Gilmer. We are previewing every SEC football team for the 2022 season. I think this is number 4. And the Aggies, guys, before we talk football, Blake, I'll start with you. Is any team had a more interesting and eventful offseason than Texas A&M?
Thought this was going to be a pro wrestling question. I was prepared though. That was for our previous conversation. It was not recorded. No, it's been a very interesting off season to say the least. And as we know, Jimbo not one to shy away from expressing his opinion on things. And yeah, it's certainly been quite an off season. There have been a lot of things I think for A&M, and one of the reasons why they are expected to be such a good team this season. When you kind of look at the talent they're going to bring in, that's been one part of the offseason. But yeah, there's been some notable things for him. And hey, he seems like a very confident man heading into the season about this Texas A&M team. So we will see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with your pro wrestling theme, Blake, if you're talking about the comparison between Alabama and Texas A&M, for me, you're talking about like Goldberg during his streak being Alabama and Texas A&M being being Chris Jericho, the whiny Chris Jericho. So, hey, when it comes down to it, Texas A&M, they have a lot of excitement in that program, but my question is the excitement warranted? I mean, you go 8-4, yes, you pull in, or as Nick Saban says, you buy the best recruiting class in history. But now that becomes incumbent upon Jimbo and Texas A&M to get over that. I think what my question is, what is success for Texas A&M this year? They beat Alabama last year, but they didn't come close to winning the West. Is this a year where they have to win the West with what they pulled off in recruiting, Chris?
No, I don't think so. I mean, everything that I see is 2023 is the year. And I think unless you're just look, you're in the same division with an Alabama team that's supposed to be vintage Alabama. We will wait and see. I wouldn't think expectations are that. By the way, you guys just couldn't help yourselves with the pro wrestling stuff.
I got another one coming here in just a second. Just wait on it.
I'll have no idea what you're talking about.
Probably
but anyway, let's redirect the conversation a little bit. I'm going to direct this just at Blayne because he's the one who follows recruiting more than any of us in this chat here. How good is that recruiting class? Because I'm hearing best ever. They had 18 top 100 guys on one service. The defensive line is just one for the ages that they recruited, including the number 1 or number 2 player in the country, depending, I guess, on where you look. But Blayne, what's your opinion on that class and how good do you think it was?
I think it was excellent, especially on defense. I mean, when you talk about bringing in 4 of the top 5 rated defensive linemen in the country, that is unheard of. I mean, all in the same class, and they set a record for the number of 5 stars signed in one class. It was just one thing after another. They bring in a receiver in Evan Stewart that is absolutely electric. That they're going to be, he's going to be one of the few deep threat. That's one thing that Texas A&M doesn't have right now. They don't have a guy that, or at least they didn't before Evan Stewart arrived, that is a, true home run type threat. So he's there, but it all is going to hinge upon how good is Connor Weigman, during his time at Texas A&M, the quarterback. And he, believe it or not, Jimbo Fisher, time and time again, when he was asked, hey, why didn't you guys go after Arch Manning? Why didn't you guys do this and that? And he said, well, I think Connor Weigman's the best in the country. And that included Quinn Ewers, who they could have tried to bring back to Texas, but he went to Texas Longhorns, but they tried to stick with Connor Weigman. So I think that his success during his tenure at Texas A&M will ultimately tell the tale, because as we talked about in our Tennessee preview, which, by the way, you can catch that over on the channel, all the teams, like Chris said, Hendon Hooker at quarterback, that makes all the difference. So what's going to make the difference for Texas A&M this year? Who's the quarterback going to be, and how successful are they?
Yeah, that is one of the big questions to me. We're doing this early August, so the answer may be decided by the time some people see this, but I mean, they've got a very interesting battle. They've got a 5-star freshman who I'd presume isn't coming to A&M thinking anything less than I'm going to be in the battle. They signed Max Johnson, who had a really good stat line at LSU in a season that kind of fell apart down there. Then they got Haynes King, who was supposed to be the guy. Then you had injury. I mean, I don't know if there's a more fascinating quarterback battle anywhere in the country than what we'll see in College Station.
Well, and I think especially relative to the expectations. This is a team that, like we said, is I think your expectation. If it's not to, going back to conversation, I'm gonna disagree a little bit. I think their expectation absolutely is thinking that we have to eclipse Alabama. Like, I mean, because if you don't do it this year, win, right? Like, because this is year 5. They're paying Jimbo a lot of money, and like Blayne said earlier, this is not a knock on Texas A&M. It's just the facts. 3 of the 4 years, they've lost 4 or more games, and we, as we know, that's not going to get you into the college football playoff. That's not going to put you in that conversation at the top of the SEC with an Alabama year in and year out. So I think, to me, that's the expectation every year now for A&M, because as we know, it's with the SEC West, especially, guys, we know how difficult it is. And like, you're looking at teams like LSU, Auburn now, who have been there at the top, and you understand they can still get there. But right now, you feel like they're in a little bit of a transition, right? So, and then you've got Ole Miss, Mississippi State. I think both those programs don't exactly know what to expect necessarily. Ole Miss with changing quarterback, don't know what the defense is going to look like. Mississippi State, can they take a jump? So those are 4-year. I mean, Arkansas, I think, is going to be pretty good. We'll get to them eventually on our previews, but that leaves Alabama and A&M. And I think when you look at it that way, like, for A&M, that's what you're chasing, and I think that is the expectation now. And I think anyone who says any differently, because I just feel like Texas A&M fans, great, you beat Alabama last year, but what did it really get you overall? And I think that's the thing. Knowing what we've seen this offseason, knowing the back and forth battle between those 2 head coaches specifically, I think that only raises the stakes now to where this game is even more important now. And how important that game is going to be if you're trying to win the division, get to an SEC title game, get to the college football playoff. You're paying this guy a lot of money, and you're in the state of Texas. I think your goal is to win the national championship every year. And I think at this point, if they have another 8-4 season or whatever, 9-4, I just don't think that's meeting expectations at this point. I just don't think so. So.
Yeah, the 12th man will have some major heartburn if they lose 12. If they lose 4 games this year, I feel like that will not be satisfactory in the least. But let me tell you something. This, and I know we're going to get to schedule in a minute, but this is a Texas A&M team that they won't have long, Chris, to kind of get their footing with that quarterback battle and get some continuity in their passing game, because they're bringing in 2 newer running backs. Okay. I mean, I know A-Chain has been there, and he's going to kind of be the little bit. Amari Daniels is going to be a guy who's going to get some carries. And Smith can move into the backfield and do some stuff like that. So some new depth behind A-Chain there, and A-Chain really becomes the guy this year. Evan Stewart, does he become like a go-to guy for him as a freshman? So there's a lot of questions to be answered on the offense early on. And my point is, you're gonna be favored in all 3 of those games. But at the end of the day, when you face a good, and people are gonna laugh, a good Sam Houston team. Sam Houston always plays good football. An App State team always plays good, disciplined football. I'm not saying that they'll even be close in any of those games, but they're going to play a good brand of football, be physical, be disciplined. And then Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes come to College Station, and that's going to be a spectacle in itself.
Well, you made a good point, and I would not that we're being argumentative, or not that you're saying otherwise here, that they're in trouble the first couple of weeks, but you do have having Anais Smith and Devin A-Chain is a pretty nice.
Oh yeah,
fallback's not the word, but you know what I mean. That's a pretty. I mean, there aren't many teams in the country that have got 2 guys
elite speed.
Yeah, that, like, if you're a defensive coordinator, you're having nightmares. You do not want to see those guys with the ball in the open field. They recruited well at receiver. We talked about the quarterback depth. Oh, and by the way, the offensive line. They returned 3-4 returning starters. I think they're supposed to be better. Lost 1 to the NFL. but pretty good there too. So they do have some. And look, I mean, Sam Houston State and Appalachian State are not pushovers, but at least you look at the other games on the schedule, they're not starting with Arkansas or Alabama or somebody. So they've got a little bit of leeway between the players and the schedule before it really hits.
If they are who they are supposed to be, they'll dominate those 2 games up front. Yeah. And then they'll also take care of business against a Miami team who everybody thinks is supposed to be markedly better. And they have a really good quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke. But, there's some other things too that I think people need to notice that could be hidden strengths of this team. I think Max Wright and Blake Smith at tight end were very, very good in the spring game for Texas A&M. And when you have a young quarterback or a new quarterback, either of the two, what are your best friends as an offensive coordinator, and what is Jimbo comfortable with? It's being able to run the football, and it's being able to have those tight ends. They're replacing, Weidemeyer, have those tight ends that can be big time, play action guys, key third down guys, sneak them out in the flats, hit them in those intermediate routes, red zone threats. So I think that is going to be a hidden strength with the youth at receiver. And, I think that they're going to rely on that speed of when you look at the Amari Daniels, Anaya Smith, Evan Stewart, and Devin Achane, that's a 4x100 team anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
Okay. On track and field. So those guys can fly. It's just going to be how experienced, how fast does the quarterback get adjusted? How fast does the continuity go for the offense? And then defense is where we know that they loaded up Blake, and this defense should be pretty good again.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is we know what to expect from the defense, even though there's new personnel. I think we kind of understand what they're going to do, and I think they're going to, they're going to impose their will on teams. I think especially when you look at, like you talked about, the speed and I think the size they're going to have, that they're, even if you want to kind of look at it and say maybe they take a bit of a slight step back because you are replacing, so many guys on the defensive line that were very, accomplished players, and you've only got, you've got some guys replaced on that side of the ball, easiest way to put it, but you're still talking about going to have one of the best secondaries in the country.
Yeah.
Their defensive backs are terrific, and I think that will help them too in a lot of games where, we've said it, guys, as we'll go through these previews, there's some pretty good passing attacks in the SEC. When you definitely look up and down the line this year, I feel like years ago there was a conversation of, man, you just weren't really sure about the passing attacks, a lot of leaning on the running game. So going to be teams that do that, but you've got some pretty talented offenses, I think, when you really go across the board this year. So that's something that will help out too, I think, for A&M, just being able to lean on their secondary, who will be very good. And special teams, I know that's a small thing, but this is still a team. I think special teams wise, we'll be able to make some plays there too. So I think there's a lot to like about this team, and especially on the defensive side. Obviously, when you look at just the numbers themselves on the guys they're going to be bringing into the mix, that defensive line is going to be just so fascinating to watch, I think, this year. And that's certainly something I think when you really circle with A&M, you look at how all these guys are going to get acclimated, and I think they're going to have those elements, those intangibles I think you need on defense to be just fine.
Look at, Georgia's defense a year ago. What made it so strong is being able to rotate in all those guys and have that depth. So they've got, Tunmi Adele, Jackson McKinley, and Shamar Turner up front that are all going to be the returning guys that can really play. And then you add guys like Shamar Stewart and Walter Nolan, who were 5 stars from that unbelievable class behind them. That gives you guys where those guys don't have to be the guy, God forbid injury or something like that. They don't have to be the guy, but they get to come in on a key third down and just say, hey, go get the quarterback, buddy. That's what an insanely talented freshman can go do, and doesn't necessarily have to understand everything that's going on around him. And then they've got returners in the linebacker spot, and Adrian Cooper and Andre White, that are going to bring that toughness, that experience as well. So this defense, ought to be a defense that that DJ Durkin can do some really good things with. And I think Jimbo Fisher, knowing what we said on offense earlier with the development that's going to need to take place, is going to play complementary football. And DJ Durkin being a former head coach himself, I think they're going to work very, very well together.
Blayne, you mentioned the Georgia defense last year, and one thing about that unit is it just all worked in tandem. They had great cover guys on the back, great safeties, excellent play at corner, depth at corner, and they also had like 43 guys who could get after the passer in the front seven. I'm not saying A&M is 21 Georgia. That's a leap to get there, but you look at the secondary. I think Antonio Johnson on Pro Football Focus, and I think he was in the nickel role for them a year ago. So sometimes you see him listed as a safety, sometimes you saw him listed as a corner. I think if he wasn't the top rated defensive back by Pro Football Focus last year, he was up there. Damani Richardson, Jalen Jones returned. They've got, as Blake said, one of the better secondaries in the country. You mentioned the experience in some of the guys up front. They've got a little experience at linebacker too, and then maybe 4 of the top 5 defensive linemen in the country. Now, I'm interested to see Walter Nolan right off the bat. Blake and I live in Tennessee, saw him play in the state title game last year. They were having to sub him out because he looked gassed and out of shape. And when you're playing tempo offenses in the league, now A&M is going to sub out a lot too, but just kind of a point I'm looking to watch, having seen him, is what kind of shape he's in. But regardless of how you slice it, my goodness, those things should work in tandem. When you got stud defensive linemen and experienced guys on the back end who played well, it's a really a dangerous combination if you are an offense going up against them.
Yeah, and I went to Walter Nolan's high school. I went to Pal and watched him practice, and in that practice, I saw him commit assault on many poor defenseless high school linemen across from him in that practice, and he's just a phenomenal talent. And when it comes down to it, like you said, it's all got to work together, back to front. They've got their starting corners back in Tyreek Chappell and Jalen Jones. You mentioned Antonio Johnson, so it is going to be intriguing to see the defense, but they're going to get tested early as game 3 on that schedule. People talk about the Alabama Texas A&M game because of all drama. I think that Miami Texas A&M game is going to be one of the more compelling games of the season.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think it's a night game, isn't it? Yeah, that's going to be a fun one in College Station for sure. But I mean, it goes back to what Blayne said. It's not like they're easing into things here. And we talked about this, Chris, when we did the schedule preview, right? I mean, we said this is a schedule because not only are you getting the SEC West games, like we mentioned. I mean, you're going to play Florida from the East, who we think will be a good enough team. You got to go on the road against South Carolina. You got those first 3 games, like we mentioned. Was it Sam Houston State won 21 games in a row in 2021 until losing that game in the playoff? And look at Appalachian State. The way they're going to play. Like this is a tough schedule, and that's one where, like, if you can navigate your way through this schedule, they will have earned it. I think to have that opportunity. And like you mentioned, the game that's going to be circled, as we all know, is going to be the one on October the 8th at Alabama. And here you go, Blayne. I was waiting for it. I was just waiting for the right time. To be the man, you got to beat the man. And that's what it comes down to. But guess what? You got to beat everybody else too. They beat the man last year in Alabama, who didn't wind up actually being the man. Sorry, Ric Flair fans. If you're not a Ric Flair fan, you won't get all this. But if you are, you will totally understand it. But that's what it comes down to. This is the most anticipated game, I think, on paper going into the season. We talked about the Tennessee in our Tennessee preview, maybe the Tennessee-Alabama game, depending on where Tennessee's at that point. But right now, there's no game in college football people are circling more than Texas A&M at Alabama, just given the storylines involved and given what we could see from those 2 teams heading into it. So,
yeah, and it's going to be intriguing because Alabama's going to be a 17, 18-point favorite going into that thing. So we'll see how it goes. But that's what Vegas is going to have that thing at. There's not one game on Bama's schedule, I don't think, that they're favored by less than 12 points. So we'll see Texas A&M if you got two in a row and can you hit the magic spell there twice against Saban.
First of all, wrestling's not real. Second of all, all right, that's it. I'm heading out.
Take him off the screen.
Here. Let's run off the stage here. I'm gonna go grab a steel chair. I'll be right
I used
back.
to drive my roommates crazy. by saying that.
Hey, I tell you what was real. Speaking about Ric Flair, they Dusty Rhodes could have put the Hard Times promo on Texas A&M season after that Alabama season game.
Yeah, just keep it up. Second of all, are we glossing over the fact that A&M is playing away from home 4 straight weeks, right in the middle of that schedule, right after playing Miami?
Not ideal.
Again, you got youth at places, and now look, one of them is a neutral site game against Arkansas. It's in Arlington, so there's that. But I mean, that's
but September 17th to November or October 29th is a long time to go without playing a home game. So yeah.
I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for people for that Miami game to get their entrepreneurship on and make the cadets versus convicts T-shirts that come on, because that's coming. It's gonna be. I mean, there was the BYU Coastal Carolina game a couple years ago. It was the Mormons versus the Mullets. Well, this is going to be the cadets versus the convicts. It's going to be good. But Miami embraces that. They're back.
I don't know if you could get away with Catholics versus convicts anymore on a T-shirt, can you?
Hey, have you seen what goes on in 2022? There's lots of stuff you can get away with
here, Chris. This is SEC football.
True.
This is there's nothing that's really off limits, I don't think. So
that's also true. All right, let's wrap it up. Any parting thoughts on the Aggies that we didn't get to that are worth a mention?
How about this? What is Texas A&M's projected win total? I'm going to look this up real quick because I
now while you're looking, I will give you
8.5
title odds.
8.5.
We're 30-1. SEC title odds were about 10-1.
All right, so 8.5 is their projected win total. I'm just telling you guys, I think that they absolutely have to go over that number for this to be considered a successful season. And maybe we're going to get a lot of Texas A&M comments saying, "No, we're fine with 8-4." But think about what I just said. These teams, no one's fine with 8-4.
They may be fine with 8-4, but are the guys who are ponying up literally millions of dollars towards their NIL efforts? Not saying they're illegal. I'm saying it's true. Millions and millions of dollars going towards the NIL effort. Eventually, if there's not a return on that investment, does it dry up? So that's where you got to win ball games.
Okay, let me ask.
Go ahead,
let me just frame it this way, okay? I get the expectations and everything, but there's the schedule, there's the fact that there's no pass out in the West, all the things we could name. Like, okay, so let's say they're 8-4 at the end of the regular season. They're not going to go fire Jimbo Fisher.
Well, they can't. They can't afford to.
Well, that's also true. Although I don't know that that's ever an obstacle anymore, given what we've seen with some of the buyouts. But here's my point, right? Maybe that makes 2023 really interesting if they do go 8-4, because then you got all those players that you just brought in. Now that's assuming, they don't get rated in the transfer portal, which that's the wild card in all this. I just think that would be very interesting to see what the reaction is. Well, let's say what's the reaction if they do go 8-4? But it's like, but 2023 with all they've recruited. And I don't know that that's an unfair bar of expectation there. But it is the SEC. People go crazy with expectations. And, they have probably underachieved a little bit compared to what they were paying Jimbo Fisher since he's been there.
Yeah. They won't get rid of Jimbo Fisher, but he might get the Brian Harsin treatment if they go 8-4.
See, and that's what I was going to say. Like, here's the thing is, like, we can all, and we do this all the time, I know, but it's like we can all point at Alabama and say, well, Alabama's in there, so by default, you should be playing for second. Well, Georgia's not playing for second place anymore. And so I think that's the thing. It's like when you consider the resources, you consider everything A&M's put in. I know you're still playing in the West, and you've still got a very tough schedule, which we just talked about. But and I'm with you, Chris. Like there's so much young talent on that roster that yes, building to next year becomes huge because the expectations are going to be very high going into next season. But I still think going into this season, when you're considered a preseason top 10 team, the expectation is that you can win a conference title or get to a college football playoff if you're a preseason top 10 team, even though you're playing in the SEC and you got a couple other teams in there with you with Alabama and Georgia. But I don't know. I still look at that and say, again, if they go 8-4 again this season, it's year 5, man. And I know we can say a lot of things about Alabama and all this, but what do you do at this point? What do you just say we're just going to wait till Saban retires and then let's go win from there, or do you kind of do the Georgia method of at some point you got to get over the hump, right? And I'm curious to see how that plays out. So
my last point on this is the reason there's a sense of urgency is because if anybody thinks that Greg Sankey is going to actually let UCLA and USC get into the Big Ten and a year before Texas and Oklahoma actually get into the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma getting into the SEC is something that Texas A&M is not happy about. They are not there. Yeah. That is more pressure. The pressure is to win now before they get in there, because once they get into the SEC and they start getting to put that SEC patch on their uniform, it's only going to help the recruiting on their end. And man, it's going to be wonderful to see those 3 teams just absolutely beat the devil out of each other while Saban is still over there just trying to do his thing. So.
Is perception of them any different if in 2020 they get picked to go to the playoff, which was totally out of their control, but they went 9-1 against an all SEC schedule? I mean, I know he's got the underachieving label, and I don't know that that's entirely unfair, but if they get into the playoff 2 years ago, does this whole discussion look a little different?
Yes, because I think it buys you some time, if anything. Yeah. I mean, now again, I even though your expectation can be to go there every season, I think you understand still at this point, you're probably not going to do that every single season. But I think you buy yourself a little time if you just have one on there. But the problem is, like we said, outside of that season, everything else has 4 more losses. And it goes back to last season, right? You can have the highs of beating an Alabama, but guess what? You can also have the lows of, what was it? The who am I thinking of? It slipped my mind.
Mississippi State.
So, like, those are the things. So,
well, what did Jimbo have that year? He also had a 3-year starter at quarterback in Kellen Mond, who that's not the case this year. So, Jimbo's known for his prowess of being able to develop quarterbacks. Can that happen in short order here with Max Johnson, Haynes King, or Connor Wegman?
And just real quickly, Chris, to follow up on that, I'm not saying they're going to win the national championship this year, and I don't, because we don't even know who their starting quarterback is. We're talking about this in early August. That's hard to pick a national champion when you don't know who their starting quarterback is going to be. But I still think, like, there has to be significant progress, in my opinion, because I don't look at this and, if they go 10-2, I think that's great. Like, let's say you lose to Alabama and maybe you lose another game in there somewhere. I think, okay, like we're headed in the right direction. We have double-digit wins now. But I also don't think that going an 8-4 now at this point is probably going to be acceptable to those people who will be making those kind of decisions. And again, it's not like they're going to fire him, but I think that pressure that Blayne talked about is starting to increase year after year now, knowing what's ahead. And I think you're just in a situation now where, look, you've got to start making that jump to where maybe you can be one of those teams that stays right there with Alabama every single season. And we're talking about Alabama and A&M at the top of the West instead of a rotating group of an LSU, of an Arkansas, or these other teams. I think that to me is what you want to see from A&M this season.
Blayne, I'll leave it to you to wrap us up here.
Better win 9 games or more. It's going to get rocky in Aggie land.
Yeah. NIL and expectations have just added jet fuel. Look, every school in the conference has got expectations but one. And this is a very unique mix. I think sometimes recruiting classes they're a blessing and a curse, right? Because you need them to compete at the level that they are competing at. But they're the thing that can hang you too if you do have an 8-win season where the expectation is 10, right?
Yeah, it can. And I mean that they've went out, they've used the NIL tremendously. I'm not caught being Saban and saying it in an illegal way. I'm saying it's the era that we're in. They've done it better than anybody so far. So we'll see if the fruits of their labor pay off on the gridiron.
Okay, we are talking about all 14 SEC schools and previewing their seasons. We've got 4 in the books. We've got 10 more to go. We've done schedules for everybody. We've got other content coming up. So, and by the way, a lot of basketball stuff on the horizon, probably early September. We specialize in that too. But anyway, hit that subscribe button if you have not. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.